This is my presentation about stamps of the Dodecanese Islands. This picture, by the way, is a picture from the island of Ikaria, and we'll hear more about that in the course of the presentation. I want to mention two things about my sources. Most of my information is from the Greek stamp catalog, Hellas, edited by Kalymnos. But I also consulted an interesting item that I found in the Collectors Club library in New York. It's a bulletin of the Hellenic Philatelic Society of Great Britain. It had a lot of detail that I hadn't formerly encountered. Yes, well, here's a map. This is an overall map of Greece showing the location of the different island groups. Greece has something like around 6,000 islands, depending more or less on how small an island you count. Some of them are tiny. Only about 225 are inhabited, but they fall into different groups. The Ionian Islands are over here on the west. This is the Ionian Sea, starting with Corfu, and going down all the way as far as Kythera here. The Cyclades are here in this area. The North Aegean Islands, the main ones being Limnos, Lesbos, Chios, and the Dodecanese are down here. Dodeca means 12 in Greek. But there are not actually 12 islands, and there's a story behind how the islands came to have that name. I thought it would be interesting to consider this relative sizes of the islands. The 10 largest islands, and by the way, I haven't yet mentioned the largest one, namely Crete, down here. So the largest is Crete. The second largest is this one, Evia, over here on the east coast. Separated from the mainland only by a small amount of water. Then Lesbos, also known as Mytilene, after the name of its capital town, is here. That's the third largest. Rhodes, which is part of the Dodecanese group, is the fourth. And it's certainly by far the major island of the Dodecanese group. Chios is next, then Kefalonia, which is the largest of the Ionian Islands, Corfu, then Limnos, Samos, which is down here, and Naxos is finally the 10th. That's the largest of the Cyclades. Only two of them, Evia here and Naxos, were part of the original nation of Greece when it achieved independence from the Ottoman Empire. And all of the other islands or island groups at one time or another have had their own stamps, either from some provisional issue or occupation issue. So this gives a historical overview of the growth of the Greek nation over time, starting out in 1830. When independence was first achieved, independence from the Ottoman Empire. The first addition to this group was the Ionian group, islands, a set of islands that had been controlled by Great Britain, were literally given as a gift to the Greek state in 1864. In 1881, this region, which is Thessaly plus a part of Epirus, became part of Greece as a consequence of the war between Russia and Turkey. There were a lot of diplomatic conferences and rearrangements of borders, and this area was added to Greece. In 1913, the Balkan War, First Balkan War, resulted in the addition of all this territory, southern Epirus, southern Macedonia, west part of Thrace. Actually, I shouldn't say that. This is Thrace is over here, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But also these islands, Limnos and Lesbos and Chios and Crete, All these became part of Greece in 1913. At the end of the Second Balkan War, Bulgaria was awarded Western Thrace. This is Western Thrace, and it remained part of Bulgarian territory, giving them an outlet on the Aegean Sea until 1920. Bulgaria was on the losing side in World War I, and in the Treaty of Sèvres, this territory was given to Greece. Eastern Thrace is over here. That is still to this day part of Turkey. Then the last area to be added, 1947, the Dodecanese Islands down here. And I'll be going into the reasons for that. It was added to Greece by the Treaty of Paris in 1947 after the end of World War II. So here's a close-up of the Dodecanese group. The next slide here this is a list of the islands with their names in Greek, in Italian, and in English. The Italian names will be familiar to stamp collectors because of the individual island overprints that were made during the period of Italian control. You'll notice I have these dotted lines. There's a dotted line here around Ikaria because Ikaria is part of the Dodecanese group geographically, but in 1912, it broke away from the rest, literally seceded from the group, and it became part of Greece, whereas the rest of the islands were under Italian occupation and became a group called the Italian Aegean Islands in 1920. So here are the islands. Rhodes is the largest. I believe Carpathos would be the second largest. And Kos is also very important. The other islands are smaller. Leros has an interesting history as a military base during World War II. The interesting thing about this group, and you'll see from the list of names, it's not 12. There are actually a total of 15 islands on this list. Okay, so why are they called Dodecanese? The islands have a long, long history going back. They were part of the Roman Empire, part of the Byzantine Empire, and then part of the Venetian Empire briefly. In 1522, they were actually under the control of a group called the Knights of St. John. This was a military order that had been founded during the Crusades in Jerusalem. The Knights of St. John were driven out of Jerusalem when it was reconquered by Saladin and the Turkish groups. And so they moved to Rhodes and took up residence there. But they were driven out in 1522 by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was constantly expanding, and they finally arrived in this area in 1522. And the Knights of St. John then departed and settled in Malta and became known as the Knights of Malta. Maybe you've heard that name. Here there are 15 islands, as I said, including Castellarizo over here, which is actually not geographically part of the Dodecanese. And it was not considered a part of the group by the Ottomans. They considered the group to include these 14 islands. What happened was they granted certain privileges of self-government to 12 of them, but not to Rhodes or Kos. Rhodes and Kos had been the islands that put up the strongest resistance to the Turkish takeover. And so when the Ottomans took control, they directly governed Rhodes and Kos, but they allowed the other islands to have their own self-government. They were known as the 12 privileged islands. So 12 plus 2 is 14. And the name Dodecanese, referring to these so-called privileged islands, stuck for the whole group. Even though at the time the name was given, Rhodes and Kos were not part of the 12. Now we get to stamps. Here's a sort of a postal history timeline. The Turkish period, Turkish stamps were used throughout the islands. Actually, it should say 1912, because although the Italian-Turkish War broke out in 1911, it didn't reach the Dodecanese until 1912. One of the islands, Ikaria, as I mentioned, broke away from the rest and briefly issued its own stamps, which we'll see, and then became a part of Greece and used the Greek New Territory stamps. Another island, Kalymnos, issued local stamps that were briefly used in the summer of 1912 before being suppressed by the Italians. Then we reached the Italian period. Italy began occupying the islands in the spring of 1912 and annexed all except Ikaria, which had become part of Greece, and Castellorizo, which Italy later acquired, but not until 1920. So for a period then between 1912 and 1920, Castellorizo had a different history, and we'll see about that. Castellorizo was occupied by Greek forces from 1913 to 1915 and by the French Navy from 1915 till 1920. And finally, as I said, the Treaty of Sèvres gave the islands to Italy. So then Italy began issuing non-overprinted stamps. They had been using Italian stamps with overprints, but they issued the first non-overprinted stamps for Rhodes in 1929 and for the rest of the islands in 1932. And these were the stamps in use until 1943. The islands were occupied by Germany in 1943. That would be after the Italians surrendered to the Allies. Then the Germans took over in occupying the islands. And then by Great Britain from 1945 to 47, when the islands became part of Greece and began using Greek stamps. Well, that's the whole story. I'm only going to cover the first part of it today in terms of the stamps and get to the rest another time. So here's our first postal item. This is a postcard from the Turkish period, written in Turkish, using an Ottoman Empire stamp from 1909, canceled in Rhodes. Here's the front of the card, by the way. Looks like a handmade card, a very nice drawing of the Palais de Justice, fait par un ami, made by a friend. And here's the cancellation, close up. It's what is known as a dual language, dual date postmark. You can't see the date too clearly, but you can make it out if you look carefully. So the date is 15/6/11. So June 15th, 1911, from Rhodes to Paris. The dating at the left is the Latin form, and then at the right here is the Turkish date. Turkish numerals are here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's interesting to study these enough to learn them, and then you can read the denominations and the dates on Turkish postal items. This writing is Arabic, not Turkish, but the numerals themselves are the same in both languages. Okay, so the date at the right is actually, it reads 1327, 327 here. They leave off the 1, and it's 327, but that means 1327-4-2. So the question arises, how do we get from 1320 from, the numerals in the date read from right to left in the Turkish date. This is the day, 2, this is the month, 4, and the year, 1327. Although you have to remember that when writing a number like 1327, you do read from left to right. That's how Turkish and Arabic numerals work. The Islamic calendar itself is lunar, and so the years are of different length from calendars used in Europe, either the Gregorian or Julian calendar. They're both solar calendars. In the late 19th century, the Ottomans adopted a fiscal administrative solar calendar in order to bring their dating system into some kind of correspondence with Western countries. In this calendar, the years are aligned with years on the Western calendar. So every time a year changes for us, it also changes for them in that calendar. The years are always exactly 584 years behind the Western calendar years. 584, I believe, is the birth date of Muhammad. I think that's how they arrived at that. So the number 1327, if you add 584 to that, you get 1911. So that explains where the year comes from. Now, the Ottoman solar calendar had 12 months, but they began with March, not with January. So then the fourth month would be June. 6 over here and 4 here, because they're starting in March. And finally, the day, 2 as opposed to 15. The Ottoman solar calendar followed the Julian calendar, which was at the so-called old style calendar. There was a changeover, as you know, from Julian style to Gregorian style dating, which different European countries adopted at different periods. And Greece, among others, was still using the Julian calendar at this time. And Turkey as well followed the Julian dating. So they're 13 days behind. If you add 2 plus 13, you get 15. So we now have explained the dating on this card. Here's the arrival mark, a place called Kadıköy. It's a suburb of Istanbul. Here's another item, a piece of postal history from Rhodes, using a stamp from the Austrian offices in the Ottoman Empire. Canceled, this reads Rhodes. This is from 1869. There's no date on the cancellation. That is, you can read 16 September, but you can't read the year. I assume that this date is derived from something written inside the letter. I don't own this. This is an image which I took from an auction catalog. 1869, it's only 2 years after the Austrian offices started issuing stamps for use in the Ottoman Empire. So this card goes from Rhodes to Trieste, and it's a 15 soldi stamp of the coarse printing. Those who collect this area will know that there are coarse and fine printings. And in this case, you can be certain that it's the coarse printing because this date is before the fine printings were issued. All right, now we've talked about Ikaria before and how it seceded from the Dodecanese. The Italians saw an opportunity to gain territory in 1911 because the Ottoman Empire was weak and Italy aspired to have a colonial empire like the other major European powers. So they attacked primarily in North Africa, in Tripolitania. But at the same time, there were secret committees set up in the Dodecanese Islands that tried to take advantage of this war by inviting the Italians to come and liberate their territory from Turkish rule. And this turned out to be something that the Italians could do. They sent a naval force to land Marines on this small island, Astapalaya, known as Stampalia in Italian, and set up a base there from which they attacked the stronghold of Rhodes in May of 1912. While the Italians were busy in Rhodes, the Icarians rose up and expelled their Turkish rulers. In July of 1912, they established the Free State of Ikaria, and in October issued a set of local stamps. After the outbreak of the First Balkan War in October 1912, the Greek Navy arrived and occupied Ikaria with the enthusiastic approval of the islanders, most of whom were Greek by nationality, which is, by the way, true of all of the Dodecanese islands. The population was primarily Greek. And then from that point, Ikaria was included among the new territories. All the territory I showed on the map that was acquired in 1913 and was formally liberated from Turkish rule by the Treaty of London, which ended the First Balkan War in May of 1913. So Ikaria, although originally part of the Dodecanese group, was never part of the Italian Aegean Islands. Here are the stamps that they issued. Beautiful set of stamps for the Free State of Ikaria. The image is one, I think, as far as I know, it's a sort of a generalized female head signifying liberty. The headdress or hair is a little bit difficult to make out. But anyway, it's a nice design. There are forgeries of these stamps. Well, before I get to the forgeries, this is a canceled version. It's probably what you would call a favor cancel. In other words, a stamp that did not actually pass through the mail, but was postmarked with a postmark that reads, if you could read the whole thing, it would be Free State of Ikaria, and then Kentrikon Tachydromia, Central Post Office. And the date is 2410, October of 1912.
Do we know where these were printed? Were these printed on the island?
I don't believe they were. If you look in the Hellas catalog, I think you'll find information about where they were printed. I feel certain that they were not printed on the island. Here are genuine and forged stamps. The genuine stamp on the right, the forgery on the left. This image is taken from a wonderful book called Comparison of Hellenic Postal Stamps by Orestes Vlastos, which has extremely detailed descriptions of genuine and forged stamps, the entire period of Greek stamps from the first ones in 1861 to about 1923. The difference between the genuine and forged is pretty obvious. The shading is coarser, the lines are more cloudy and unclear. I notice also that the cancellation is not the same as the cancel on the stamp I showed you. That's the genuine cancellation, and this one, it appears to have the word tachydromia or postal service here. Clearly, it's a forged cancellation as well as the forged stamp. Vlastos lists a number of different types of forgeries, but they're all about the same. They all differ from the genuine in the same ways, with coarse impressions, dark and unclear shading. This is an example of stamps that were produced in Athens for use in the new territories, which at that point included Ikaria. All of the new territories were sent these stamps to use until more formal stamps could be issued. They took ordinary Greek stamps and overprinted them. Helleniki Diacosis, Hellenic administration. And these were supposed to be used in Ikaria. They didn't arrive. They took time to arrive. And in January of 1913, these provisional overprints were created in Ikaria for use until the official stamps arrived from Athens. So you have these very crude impressions of the same words, Helleniki Diacosis. These were apparently carved. I don't know what the material was. It could have been rubber or cork or some kind of wood. Interestingly, there are forgeries of these as well. And usually the forgeries are much clearer than the originals. Here's an example. If you see this overprint in very crisp, clear letters, obviously using metal characters for the overprinting, these are obvious forgeries. All right, then on to Kalymnos. The Italians followed through on their promise of local autonomy of the Dodecanese Islands, but only up to a point, until they found that Kalymnos had set up a provisional government and issued its own stamps. These were actually the ones printed for Kalymnos, and again, here I do have information about where they were made. These were ordered from the Aspiotis firm in Corfu, which did a lot of printing of Greek stamps. No doubt ordered well in advance of the events. They were the first stamps to be issued for a territory liberated from Turkish control. These were before the Ikaria stamps. They were used very, very little before the Italians found out about them and ordered them to be confiscated and destroyed. And Kalymnos then, with the other islands, except for Ikaria, became part of the Italian Aegean area. So here are these wonderful stamps known as the Sun God stamps. That would be Apollo, the sun god, and the inscription koinon nisioton means something like Commonwealth of the Islanders. Here is an example of a cover. These are very, very rare. The stamps saw very little use. This cover, again, is not in my possession. It's from an auction catalog, and the impression, the image here is a little fuzzy, but I thought it was worth including this. Um, Canceled not on Kalymnos, but in Leros, with what is known as a municipal cancel. For a brief period before the Italians took over, the islands were self-governed by local committees called municipalities. And this is a cancellation that has the municipality of Leros in Italian and in Greek on the bottom. And in the center, it just says post. There's no date. So this is this cover would be worth thousands of dollars. In the auction realizations for items like this are very high.
The postmark in the bottom right.
That you should ignore, because this image was taken from a sort of a group picture of several different items, and this item here just simply overlaps. The address here is to Samos, and this next word is no doubt Vati, the capital city of Samos. Now, the transition from Turkish to Italian rule took time. The islands did not all at once take on their character as Italian Aegean islands. First, the Treaty of Ushi, signed in 1912, that ended the war between the Italians and the Turks. And it stated that the Dodecanese islands would remain under Ottoman sovereignty. The Italian armed forces were allowed to remain in place where they were occupying the islands as a guarantee of peace, as they called it, until the Ottomans evacuated Tripolitania. Tripolitania was awarded to the Italians, but not the Dodecanese. However, by the time the treaty was signed, October of 1912, the Balkan War had already broken out. And the Greeks had taken over the islands of the North Aegean, the major islands, Limnos, Lesbos, Chios, and so on, from Turkey. Then, that being the case, the Ottomans were no longer in a position to insist on the removal of Italian forces, as that would have opened the way for Greece to gain control of the Dodecanese as well. So Italy remained in control of the islands, except for Ikaria and Castellorezzo, until the end of World War I. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 assigned the islands to Italy, including Castellorezzo, which had been occupied by Greek and French forces, as I mentioned before. So finally, in 1920, Castellorezzo became part of the same group, but it was not occupied by the Italians during the war. This is the first Italian issue for the islands. Starting in September of 1912, so very early on, they began issuing stamps for use in the islands, and they had a particular reason for overprinting these ordinary Italian stamps with Egeo, or that's Aegean in Italian. These stamps were sold at less than face value on the islands. And the reason for that was they wanted to be able to compete with the postal services that already existed, that were run by the French and the Austrians, the so-called offices in Turkey stamps, the services provided by the major powers in the Ottoman Empire. These postal services continued to operate, and in order to make their postal service competitive, the Italians had to lower their prices. So they overprinted the stamps, which then could not be used in Italy, only on the islands. And the cancellations here, there's one in Kalymnos and one in Rhodes, or Rhodi, as the Italians call it. Now on to Castellorizo. This is the most complex area of the whole Dodecanese group. All right, in March of 1913, in the aftermath of the First Balkan War, uh, the island set up an autonomous administration, that is, local group, and declared their union with Greece. Once again, the population was primarily Greek. From September of 1913 until December of 1915, the island was under Greek military occupation. The declaration of union with Greece was not recognized by Greece. Greece did not have the resources to protect the island or make it actually part of the Greek nation, but they did send a military delegation with a military governor and a garrison of soldiers from the island of Samos. Well, the garrison from Samos was unpopular with the inhabitants, and it was withdrawn in October of 1915. And in December, the Greek navy withdrew. This was now during a period of intense fighting in the area. This was the period of the Dardanelles campaign, where the Allies were attempting to invade the Ottoman Empire and were driven back in famous Battle of Gallipoli. In any case, apparently the Greeks felt that their navy was needed elsewhere, and they withdrew from the island. And that left a sort of vacuum, which was filled by the French navy. The French arrived and took over the island and used it as a base for their operations in the Levant, in Syria, and especially in Cilicia, a part of southern Turkey. Well, then at the end of World War I, the Treaty of Sèvres, signed in August, awarded Castellorizo to the Italians, who proceeded to incorporate it into their Aegean Islands territories. Nice picture of part of Castellorizo. It's very, very close to the Turkish mainland. These hills you see in the background, that's Turkey. It's also very, very small. It's only a few square miles, but intensely settled, as you can see. Now, during the early days of the uprising, when the Greeks on the island declared their autonomy and wanted to unite with Greece, they started they started using these postmarks. These are Turkish stamps, which were available on the island at that point, but they have this overprint. Sorry, it's not an overprint. It's a postmark which reads, it's a provisional administration of Castellorizo. This a letter was addressed to somebody in Mersin, or Mersin, probably is how the French say it. That's a town in Cilicia. I can't really make out the address, but it seems to be somebody de le Ottoman, is what I can make out of that. Notice also the cross in the center of this postmark, probably indicating the transition from Islamic rule to Christian. I've never seen that stated, but it seems likely to me.
Looks like a philatelic cover. It's got all the values.
Yes, that's correct. Most of the postal items from this area, from this period, are philatelic. You'd have to admit that. There wasn't much actual mail going back and forth, although this one very well may have gone to Rhodes, addressed to Rhodes. And here we have the Greek stamps issued for the new territories. After the Hellenic overprints, these stamps, known as the campaign stamps, were issued for the new territories. And in this case, it's overprinted Castellorizo. This is an unofficial overprint. You won't find this listed in the Scott catalog, but this cover appears to have gone through the mail. It's got the Greek coat of arms and headquarters of Greek Castellorizo. Here's another item. Now this is from the period of the French occupation. Once again, we see the very densely settled island, with a Greek Red Cross stamp, basically, I guess, decorating the cover. I don't think you could call this a franking. But it's postmarked, and it has this French naval cachet. I've got a clearer picture of that here. This is the imprint you're seeing. Castellorizo, Occupation Française, and it's got the inscription of the naval group here with a beautiful anchor. So that's what you're seeing on the left there on this postcard. This is what you call a poster stamp. It's not a postal item, but commemorating or celebrating the French occupation. We're going to see the same design again, used in an Italian stamp once the Italians took over in 1921. They used the same design, which had originally appeared on this French poster stamp. Here are stamps issued by the French for use on the island. This is a French offices in the Levant stamp, the so-called liberty, equality, and fraternity stamp. As I understand the symbolism here, this idealized female figure would be represent liberty, and she has these scales indicating equality, and fraternity is represented by these little cherubs kissing. It's a very amusing image, in my opinion. The overprint, Base Navale Française, French military or naval base. The next issue by the French was changed from Base Navale to Occupation Navale Française, both on the liberty, equality, and fraternity stamps and on the famous Sower issue. That would be these. Here's an example of two of these stamps with the overprint and another naval marking. This one different from the last. That's this one. It's essentially the same one, but with the inscription in the center removed. Inscription that referred to the particular group of the French Navy. This, of course, is what you call a favor cancel, not something that went through the mail, but a sort of a souvenir of the occupation. And here's another item, once again, something that I don't own, but makes a nice addition to the postal history. It's yet a third naval cachet used as a postmark for this French Levant stamp mailed to Nantes in France. And here are the three different markings, the third one here on the right. Okay, well, that is the end of part one.